Ben Hodges is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General, former commander at the U.S. Army Europe. Welcome to our program, General Hodges.
Daniel, thank you very much.
Ukrainian drones have knocked out at least 20% of Russia's gasoline supply, according to President Zelensky. Also, reports suggest that up to 38% of Russia's oil refining capacity has also been affected by intensified Ukrainian drone campaign inside Russia. From your perspective, how much more has to happen before Vladimir Putin starts his thinking how to end this war against Ukraine?
Well, first, I have to compliment the Ukrainian General Staff and the GUR for the decision to target this very vulnerable part of Russia's economy. If Ukraine is able to destroy so much of Russia's ability to export oil and gas, it will be very difficult, in my view, to continue the war much longer. And of course, the impact on Russian civilians of their access to gasoline for their cars, etc. It's important that they understand that what's going on here and that they feel some of the pressure of this conflict. Now, one of the things, of course, that the General Staff knows is you can't just hit a refinery one time. You have to keep hitting it over and over and over to make sure that the Russians are never able to get it repaired and back online again. So I think having enough drones or missiles or different types of munitions that will enable continuous reattack to make sure they never rebuild is going to be important. Now, eventually, the Russians will start figuring out how to protect their refineries better, but that creates other opportunities then for Ukraine. So I'm impressed. I imagine this is something that will continue for months on into next year. I wish that the West would intensify its support to Ukraine of long-range strike capability, either by investing in Ukrainian defense or providing capabilities to Ukraine. And of course, the complementary part of this would be if the West would disrupt the shadow fleet vessels that are carrying Russian oil out through the Baltic Sea to China, India, Tkiie. We could also help damage Russia's oil export industry.
Also, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said that Ukrainian forces had used domestically produced Neptunes and Flamingo missiles in recent strikes against Russia's infrastructure. What does this mean?
Well, this is one of the great stories of this war, is that while under constant bombardment from the Russians and constant attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, Ukraine still manages to increase its defense production, not only in terms of numbers, but in terms of sophistication and quality. So Neptune, Flamingo, these kinds of weapons, which are so important to Ukraine's long-range strike capability, that's a remarkable achievement in my view. And I imagine that Ukrainian engineers will continue to refine, improve these systems and improve their ability to strike deep into Russia. And I also imagine that the very creative and innovative engineers there in Ukraine are looking for other ways to be able to hit targets that are even more difficult for Russian air defenses to stop.
Also, Russian citizens will face blackouts if Moscow attempts to inflict blackouts on the Ukrainians. President Zelensky recently said during a meeting with Ukrainian journalists, do you see this as a fair retaliation to Russia's attacks on Ukraine?
Well, I don't think of it in terms of what's fair or not. This is about winning the war. And Vladimir Putin is going to keep doing what he's doing as long as he thinks he can win. And so he needs to feel pressure from his own citizens as well as the oligarchs around him that help keep him in power. They need to be feeling the results of this war themselves. They should not feel immune to it. So it's not about fairness, it's about winning the war. And I would also say that the leadership inside the Russian military, every leader in the chain of command that is responsible for any attacks or against civilians in Ukraine, Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, other war crimes, those people should be looking over their shoulder for the rest of their life because the GUR is going to hunt them down just the way the Mossad does for Israel. I think this is going to be the future for Russia, for people involved in war crimes, and they should be looking over their shoulder and checking under their car for the rest of their life.
Also, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has said that Moscow had failed to convince President Trump that it is able to capture the whole Donbas region. Could this be another reason why Trump has changed his position on Ukraine, because he would like to be on the side on winner's side?
So this has been a very interesting development, obviously a positive development. Now, I don't know exactly what it was. I think hopefully it was the U.S. intelligence assessment and other observers watching to see how, or realizing finally that Russia has failed in its attempts and that Ukraine has, in my view, achieved a significant change in the initiative and the tide of war. That with what it's doing against Russia's oil and gas infrastructure and the way it has stopped Russian ground operations or limited the advances at enormous cost to the Russian side. So perhaps people now are finally realizing the truth of what's happening on the ground. Now, what would be helpful, of course, if the president would follow through with real capabilities, whether long-range precision strike, increased intelligence, disruption of Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, doing all the things, leading other countries to do the things necessary to help Ukraine defeat Russia. I don't know that he's actually going to follow through on these things. He hasn't so far, but at least the tone and his recognition is so much better than it was back in February, of course, on that terrible day when President Zelensky first was in the Oval Office with him. This is a much different tone and attitude, which will be helpful. Already, we know most of the Congress supports Ukraine, and so this could at least free up people to act more openly in support of Ukraine.
Also, U.S. President Donald Trump says that he has made a decision on sending Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. Do you feel that this is a green light from President Trump to provide Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles?
Well, I hope it is, but I have to say, I watched that interview and I'm not convinced he actually has made that decision. If you remember, and your listeners will know, that the president, when he was asked if he had made the decision, he said, yes, I have, sort of. I need to know where they're going to go. So that did not sound like the decision has really been made and that they're going to start moving out. I think there still are people within the administration that are not convinced yet or are not carrying out the president's guidance as swiftly and directly as maybe he thinks or what we would all want to see. I hope he has made the decision. I hope that the Department of Defense is moving out on this. Tomahawk would be a powerful capability or addition to Ukraine's capabilities to strike targets deep inside of Russia, especially oil and gas infrastructure or ammunition factories or places where Russians are manufacturing drones. Those are all legitimate targets. And the fact that President Putin even mentions Tomahawk tells you that they are concerned about Ukraine having that. And of course, they'll complain about it. But that should not stop the United States from providing that and other similar weapons to Ukraine. So I hope it happens. We'll have to wait and see.
But don't you think that even if President Trump decides to send Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine, we will not know about this decision for a while due to security reasons?
Yeah, well, you're right, and we shouldn't know. I mean, you and me and your listeners, we're not entitled to know these kinds of things. So I think it'll be great if the Tomahawk arrival is only made public with large explosions at Russian oil refineries. That's the best way. Now, it's interesting. I've heard people say, well, Tomahawk, that has to be launched from a submarine. How are the Ukrainians going to use this? And I say, you don't know Ukraine. You don't understand how ingenious Ukrainians are at with technology. And I think Ukraine does not need a submarine to launch a Tomahawk. There probably are some engineers that could figure out how to launch a Tomahawk off the back of a pickup truck. So let Ukraine solve that problem. Let's just give them the capability.
Also, you just mentioned about this criticism. However, there are some ground launchers for Tomahawk missiles in the US. Don't you think so?
Um, Look, I have no doubt that once the decision is made to provide Tomahawk, Ukraine will know how to get them to the target.
Also, Tomahawk deliveries could force Russia to sober up and negotiate. President Zelensky says it's important to send a signal that Ukraine will be strengthened by all means possible, according to Ukrainian president. Is he right?
Well, sure. Look, as I said earlier, the Russians will keep doing this as long as Vladimir Putin thinks he can win. And only when he feels the pressure and it becomes obvious that Russia cannot win, that the West is committed to helping Ukraine, that we're not going to turn our back or walk away, then I think you have a chance for real successful conclusion to the conflict. But if we don't do that, then because Putin doesn't care, of course, about how many casualties his troops are suffering, for him it's about staying in power and continuing to do what he is doing. So we have to make him change his calculus.
But don't you think that should we see this and perceive Tomahawk cruise missiles as a silver bullet in this war?
No, I don't believe that any one weapon is the game changer or the silver bullet. Of course, that would help, but we've for the last several years, there's different people would lock onto a weapon system, whether it's Taurus or Abrams or F-16s or whatever, and I think that's not the correct understanding of the weapons. What's important is getting capabilities into the hands of Ukrainian armed forces, and then Ukrainian armed forces employing the weapons as part of a broader strategic approach. And this is where I really trust the Ukrainian General Staff and the Ukrainian leadership to know how and where to employ different capabilities where it will inflict the most damage on Russia and also where it will be most helpful for Ukraine's effort to win this war.
Also, according to Financial Times, NATO allies are considering military response to Russia's violation of Allied airspace. NATO could deploy strike drones along the Russian border and lift restrictions on pilots to allow them to open fire against Russian aircraft to shut down Russia's air assets. Would this be enough to deter Vladimir Putin?
Well, we don't know until it happens. Right now, he is undeterred. That's why you see drones constantly over European airports and factories and seaports. Russian shadow fleet vessels sailing through the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea every day. Sabotage happening all over the place. And right now, the Russians are not feeling any consequences for these illegal activities. And so until we the West, figure out how to inflict some pain, some consequences on the Russian side, they're going to keep doing it. Now, that could include the possibility of actual kinetic action, shooting down an aircraft that has violated the airspace of a NATO country after repeated warnings, and they still do it. That certainly should be considered. But there's other things that I think they're looking at as well, whether it's economic means, seizing vessels or giving Ukraine more capability every time Russia violates airspace, for example. So there's a lot of things that could be used. The key will be the messaging that comes from NATO countries that Russia does this, this is the result, and the Kremlin knows that that result came from their violation. So making that connection of consequences to the action will be very important. And of course, the Russians will complain about it. They'll cry about it. They'll whine about it. They'll claim it's escalation, or now they have to escalate. We should be accustomed to this by now, and so be prepared for it. Have the messaging ready so that when you do shoot down a Russian aircraft, or you do shoot down drones, or you do other things, the message is out there. So don't allow the Russians to control the narrative.
You just mentioned about Russia's cry about escalation, but can they really escalate more?
Actually, I don't think so. I mean, they talk about it, and that's been our problem for the last few years, is that we were always worried that Russia might escalate, meaning they might use a nuclear weapon or something like that. They are not going to use a nuclear weapon just because we shot down a Russian aircraft that was flying through Estonian airspace, or because we seized one of their Shadow Fleet vessels, which they say are not theirs, but yet they obviously are carrying Russian oil. So, the West has all the advantages over Russia in terms of, and I'm not even talking about with the U.S., I'm talking about with the EU, plus UK, plus Norway, plus Canada, the combined economies, the military, the technology, the wealth, the populations. It is so much greater than what Russia has. And we should, these countries, the West, should be acting with so much more self-confidence. And Russia should be worried about provoking the West instead of the West always worrying about provoking Russia.
Let's also cover this drone incidents in Germany, because recently German government has adopted new laws to provide German federal police more authority to identify and shut down unidentified drones in the air. My first question would be, how does it work? Like, do you feel that some people are launching these drones from inside Germany, inside European Union, just to fly over civilian airports? And do you feel that this would be enough just to provide more authority to police to identify and shoot down them?
It's a step in the right direction, but of course it's not enough. And for sure, you have civilians that are out there, even if they're teenagers or people doing this as a hobby, or they think it's funny to do things that disrupt flights and have huge economic impact on airports and cities and people. So in addition to giving the federal police the authority to knock these things down, I mean, my goodness, we can track a meteor that's moving through space thousands of light years away and even predict how close it will come to Earth. But somehow we can't determine where a drone is coming from. I mean, I think the part of the defense of the homeland should include also having organized radar and other sensors in such a way that you can identify even small quadcopters where they're coming from. This won't be free or cheap, but if you don't do that, then it will always be a problem of attribution. Well, we don't know who did it. Okay, well, use the technology that's there to figure out who did it. And then if it's an idiot out there, that's his hobby, or a teenager doing some prank, they pay a huge price, a big fine, because when you shut down Munich Airport or Copenhagen Airport or other airports around Europe, that is enormous economic impact. I mean, lost business, plus disruption of plans of thousands of civilians. It's unacceptable. So there has to be a penalty for it. So get the means in place to do that.
And don't you think that Europeans should reach out to Ukraine to help them train soldiers, policemen, to properly shut down such drones,
Of
because there are
course.
all such training programs are in progress right now.
It's embarrassing to me that we are just now starting to talk openly about doing that. Of course, that should be watching, and I think in most places, I know in the U.S. Army they've been watching very closely what Ukraine does when it comes to drones and counter drones. Um, but governments have got to take this serious.
Let's also cover breaking news from the Middle East. Israel and Hamas have approved the Gaza ceasefire and hostage release plan. Senior Hamas figure, chief negotiator Khalil al-Hayya, says he has received guarantees from the US and mediators involved in talks with Israel that the war has completely ended. Do you also believe in the complete end of this war?
Well, first of all, I have to say that President Trump deserves credit for applying the power of his office and his personality to help get the situation where now at least it looks like there's going to be a ceasefire. I don't think that the Israeli government has voted yet. I think that's happening tonight, maybe. But it feels, based on comments coming from some of the most right-wing extremists in the Israeli government, you get the feeling that even if they're not happy about it, they will not vote against it. So that's encouraging. And of course, it will be challenging as you try to get Israeli troops out of Gaza back to this buffer zone that has been agreed. But it's more encouraging now than I have seen, in a long time, certainly over the last 2 years, that we're going to get hostages released and that Palestinians will be able to return back to their families, the 2,000 or so that have been captured by the Israeli forces. I'm reluctant to say that this is long lasting or the peace. I mean, what we're talking about is a ceasefire and a return of hostages and remains of hostages and prisoners. We still have to work out all the hard issues of the administration of Gaza, and of course the hundreds of thousands of people that desperately need medical care, humanitarian support. That's got to happen. And then you've also got, I mean, this has been a war zone for 2 years, and so you can imagine in all the rubble and all the destruction of Gaza, there are probably thousands of pieces of ordnance unexploded that are still there, and those things will have to be cleaned out before you can even begin to start reconstruction and for people to be able to come back in.
Also, it seems like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is unhappy about the terms of the deal. According to Axios, quote, Bibi told Trump there is nothing to celebrate. Trump fired back, quote, I don't know why you're always so negative. This is a win. Take it. From your perspective, do you feel that this deal is a fair one for Israel?
Of course, absolutely. I mean, this I think what's interesting here is the different power relationship between the U.S. president and the Israeli prime minister that did not exist with the three previous American presidents who had to deal with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think now you've got a case where an American president is able to put pressure on Netanyahu in such a way that he even had to take it, exactly what you just quoted, and even had to apologize to the Qataris for the Israeli strike there a few weeks ago. So this is different. And I just read earlier today where Prime Minister Netanyahu said this was a great victory for Israel and for peace and dot, dot, dot. So I think he recognizes that he has had to change his tune here. Now, of course, he's not happy with it, but I guess that's the nature of any of these negotiations. If you're trying to stop the war, neither side is going to be completely happy with what they had to sacrifice. And in this case, I think Israel recognizes that many of their supporters around the world were starting to change how they viewed Israel, that this was bad for Israel's standing in the world as well. So there's a lot of things at stake.
And do you feel that Israelis had some unachievable war objectives at the end of this conflict during the last 6-8 months?
Look, Hamas is a terrorist organization, and I think, what they did back 2 years ago was horrible. But you cannot destroy an insurgency by killing everybody. If we knew for a fact that every single Hamas soldier had been killed, you still have tens of thousands of young men that have witnessed what happened over the last 2 years in Gaza, and their life situation has only gotten worse. So that's not how you end an insurgency, and I think the Israeli government is going to have to accept what previous Israeli governments had always accepted: a two-state solution. That this war is about land, it's not about religion, and the Israeli government is going to have to be a part of, or is going to have to agree to a two-state solution. Now, the hardest part, of course, is going to be coming up with an administrative authority, a government for the Palestinian side that can administer Gaza in a way that brings back basic services. People can try to rebuild a normal sort of life there. And not everybody will be in favor of that. So there will always be pressures, but I think it feels like we're closer to it now than we have been in a long time. And I certainly hope that people realize that this is an opportunity that they do need to seize.
Also, President Zelensky commented on this issue, quote, "Even Hamas is showing readiness for negotiations, but not Vladimir Putin." Do you think that the war in Ukraine could end the way the Israel-Hamas war did?
Well, I certainly believe it could. The question is, should it? I think any agreement where Ukraine's future is not secure is not going to be sustainable. I mean, if Russia thinks they just need to negotiate something and wait for a year or two and then start again, if Ukraine's defensive capabilities and security are not significantly better, to deter that from happening again, I think I could understand why the Ukrainian government would be reluctant to do that. And I don't think that what Putin, you can't, these are not similar situations. I don't think Putin should be rewarded for his attack on Ukraine, his illegal seizure of Ukrainian territory, and the thousands of Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped, and all the war crimes. They should not be rewarded for that. So this is a decision for the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people. Is it worth it to keep fighting? Is your future secure? And frankly, for the rest of us, we should not allow Putin to be rewarded to keep what he took over the last few years. But again, I would obviously defer to the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian people. How much more can you, or are you willing to do this?
Let's also cover our final topic, the recent meeting between President Trump, Pete Hegseth, and U.S. senior military commander. Secretary Hegseth even responded to your reaction on this on X. What does this meeting mean personally for you? What's your take on that?
Well, I have to say that, of course, this was a very unusual sort of gathering. And I'd never seen something like that where you brought back everybody, all those senior people back for a meeting, unless it was to talk about something like, strategy or whatever. This was not that. But I was proud to see how those hundreds of generals and admirals and top senior non-commissioned officers, how they comported themselves. They were professional, they were respectful, and they were quiet. It did not turn into a political rally. It was exactly what we should expect, and what the American people should expect, and what all our allies should expect, that the U.S. military is an apolitical institution. Its oath is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And it's been that way since our beginning. And I think that was important for everybody to see that the senior leadership of the military is an institution that is bound to the Constitution, not to any political party or one political leader.
But if you were a four-star general sitting in that room, how would you have felt after hearing these statements, messages from President Trump and Secretary Haxett?
Well, there's several things that concern me about what was said, about the possibility of using the military against our fellow citizens in cities. Such an emphasis on physical standards that would potentially make it very difficult for women to be able to stay in the military. The way it was conveyed, I think every female soldier in the U.S. Army wants to meet the standard. So that's not an issue. It sounded like there was so much emphasis on things that would drive out or block a lot of people from serving who want to serve, and we would lose their brain and their technical skills. So that just seemed like a bit of a disconnect between what the military requires and what the secretary was advocating. Now, of course, anybody in the military should be fit. I mean, any Ukrainian soldier can tell you that the demands, even if you're a drone operator, you still have to be fit to operate in the field environment for a long period of time. I just thought that this was not the right approach when it comes to that. I think I'm uneasy with the way that they talked about rules of engagement. Rules of engagement have nothing to do with being politically correct or woke or anything like that. Rules of engagement are what help make sure our soldiers that we all operate within legal frameworks. And that's important because it helps make sure we're accomplishing the mission, not just killing everything in sight. And it also gives our allies confidence and the American people confidence. And there is also a psychological burden on soldiers who I've listened to Israeli soldiers talk about this. You know, they care for the rest of their life if they were involved in something that killed innocent people, even if it was an order that they got. That's a psychological burden there, and I don't want any of our soldiers to ever have to deal with that.
Thank you, General Hodges, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Heroam Slava.